used, but he finally showed the property to Stanley Kubrick, and it was Mr. Kubrick who finally did his own version, his own script, and the film finally emerged many, many years later. But I think in view of the fact that so many films and plays and novels were built around this particular theme, I'd like to ask you, Mr. Burgess, just how you conceive this particular story, which I think overlaps in some ways with many of your other books, which have this similar kind of rather depressing view of the future.
Well, it isn't really depressing. Well, it's not depressing to me. I'm not capable of being depressed very much. It's very simple. I was brought up as a Catholic in the north of England, and I was brought up to accept the doctrine of original sin, which I still accept under various other nominal guises. I think that man is probably inherently bad or inherently antisocial. And but yet, in a sense, man's original sin is a product of his own will. He willed it himself, and by a curious paradox, this will is rather a glorious thing to possess. There's a terrible statement made by Saint Augustine, which all Christians like to forget. But what he said about the fall of Adam, was this: "Oh, happy fault, since it produced so great a Redeemer." In other words, the Orthodox Christian must feel the fall from grace, the fall from the Garden of Eden was a good thing, because it produced Christ. And it's a good thing on a secular level, because it indicated man's desire to make his own life, to work his will, to make mistakes, and in the process of making mistakes, produce as kind of byproducts things like art and beauty and the like. Out of this powerful libido Alex, for instance, in the book and in the film, there is also cognate with it a realization of the beauty of music, the beauty of the world, the beauty of language. Alex is a man in that he is violent, as men are. He loves beauty and he loves language. And these three things go all together. If you produce a human being without the will to do evil, you produce a human being without the will to do anything, and certainly not the will to create. So this is not, in my view, a gloomy view of man at all. It's a fairly realistic view of what man is like. And the book and also the film represent a kind of fabular treatment of this human condition. It is not the future, really. It can be the future if you will. It's just a period of time which is at a slant to real time.
Well, America perhaps, but not London, I hope. You mentioned the beauty of language. Can you tell us something about how you devised the particular Russian-oriented language that was used in the film?
Well, the alternative to using a slang of my own was to use an existing slang, which would date too rapidly. It would date in a year. It would date, in fact, between the writing of the book and its publication. And certainly, 10 years after the writing and publishing of the book, the language would smell of lavender. So I had to invent a dialect of my own, and by chance I went to Russia, found that in Russia there were the same problems with teenagers as we had in the West, and it struck me I could create a kind of composite teenager who would speak a language compounded of Russian and English and American, and so.
Excuse me, brother. I ordered this 2 weeks ago. Can you see if it's arrived yet, please?
Just a minute.
Pardon me, ladies. gone pointless, isn't it, my lovely? What's happened to yours, my little sister?
Who are you getting, Bratty? Goggly Go-Go? Johnny Zhivago? The Heaven 17?
What you got back home, little sister, to play your fuzzy warbles on? I bet you got little, say, pitiful, portable picnic players. Come with Uncle and hear all proper. Hear angel trumpets and devil trombones. You are invited.
This is the electronic music studio of Walter Carlos and Rachel Elkin, where much of the music of A Clockwork Orange was made. Classical music plays as important a role in the film as it did in Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. Some of it is straight, but much of it was remade on electronic synthesizing equipment. Carlos is well known for his records, switched on Bach and the well-tempered synthesizer. For Clockwork Orange, he created new performances of Purcell's Music for the Funeral of Queen Mary, Rossini's William Tell Overture, and most spectacularly, selections from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. For the Ode to Joy sequence, Carlos used the voice encoder with elements of the Moog to vary the pitch of the vocal line as articulated by Elkind. This is one of the many techniques used in the creation of synthetic music.
The film, of course, adds many dimensions of its own. Language is one. The visuals of the film somehow enable one to accept quite clearly the often quite difficult meaning of some of the slang Russian-oriented phrases. Somehow, because of the way the scenes are designed and set up, you know automatically what the expression currently being used means, even though there's no obvious explanation for it. I think the use of music, too, is another important asset and adjunct to the film. Quite apart from the importance of the Beethoven music as a part of the plot, it somehow adds a kind of formal and timeless quality to the film. You can somehow look at this film as though you were seeing it in 2000 looking back, rather than the 1970s looking forward. I think it adds a great deal of formality of the film, which really helps it a tremendous amount. And also, of course, it's a tremendously stylized film in so many ways. And stylization in film is not a thing that usually works very well. I think one of the best examples is a 1927 film by F.W. Murnau called Sunrise, which is a very warm human love story of two people, in which the story itself is totally realistic and totally warm, but in which the acting and the set design and the decor is very much formalized and stylized in a very unusual Germanic way. And yet it works superbly well. The film is unrealistic, and yet it convinces you with its realism. Conversely, though, I think Kubrick in A Clockwork Orange goes in exactly the opposite direction. For the most part, the film is shot on location. It uses perhaps bizarre landscape settings and modernistic buildings, but he does use actual existing locations, and he creates with these very real buildings a nightmare world all his own. I think the only bizarre set sort of specifically built for the film is the opening scene, the opening set of the very erotic or exotic night milk bar at the very beginning. Am I right on that? Is that the only sort of unusual outre set that they built for the film?
Yes. In fact, we only built, I think it was 3 sets in all. The Korova milk bar, the one that you mentioned, a passageway, and the prison check-in. That was the only 3 sets that were built. The Korova, I think he got the idea for the statues. He saw an exhibition of, forgotten the sculptor's name, but he saw an exhibition in London of these sculptors, and he decided to use that.
I was wondering how you felt about sequences that have been added to the screenplay that you actually hadn't written. I'm thinking of one sequence in particular which, for me, I think helps the film tremendously. The sequence which Alex is back in the house of the author whom he'd assaulted before. And in your book, you, obviously, since the story is narrated by Alex himself, he can't tell the reader what the writer or what other events are taking place. But of course, Kubrick can come outside of that narrative, and he shows you events building up to kind of almost Hitchcockian suspense build-up, and it works extremely well in the film. How do you feel about those additions?
Oh, I was very pleased with the particular one you mentioned, where Alex is eating spaghetti bolognese and drinking wine, and it has the quality of an improvisation, which is admirable, I feel. It's very free-moving. And it's a kind of link, it's a link which is obviously a very cinematic conception, but it finds a parallel in the book. It's the exact cinematic parallel of the kind of sequence I had in the book, which is a little more complex than the one we have here. But the job done in the film is probably a little better than the job done by my own sequence in the book, because it's a lot simpler. And so I've nothing but praise for the way he's found these equivalents, these cinematic equivalents for these literary conceptions.
Having seen the film now and knowing what can be done with your work, do you think in future you'll be liable to write perhaps in a more cinematic way to make it easier, or
I always have written in a cinematic way. I always conceive a novel in terms of scenes.
Well, for example, this particular book is written around basically about one character.
Yes.
And since he's telling his own story, it's very difficult to know just what sort of character he really is. He's more of a symbol than an individual. It must have been very difficult for you to interpret that part.
Yes, because, as you rightly say, I couldn't find any realistic parallels to work within, you see. And one was playing this force, this evil force, if you like, and one had to make it a real person, in a sense, and a real personality. And I did find that difficult at the beginning. But then it just, Bog and his holy angels in heaven sent me the answer. I don't know how it happened. It just evolved, you know. I mean, the first day was terrifying, absolutely nightmarish. We shot a scene in the hospital, the Ludovico Hospital, where I'm having breakfast, and I hadn't really got a clue, you know, what I was doing, really. I was basically saying the lines and just hoping that it was right. And when we saw the rushes the next evening, Stanley said, you know, that's right, that's, we've got it, you know, that's it. And on the way home, I remember that I thought to myself, well, now, what was it? I can't remember quite what I did do, you know. It's just one of those things that happens on a film. It's something that's impossible, really, to describe how you arrived at it. The answer is on the screen.
Yes. How soon was that opening close-up of the film shot? Well into the progress of the film, or did they establish that quickly?
That close-up was shot, I should say, halfway through. Obviously, we did the two Corova scenes together. You know, you go to one location, you shoot all the stuff there, and move on to the next one. The F. Alexander stuff at his house was all shot. So before the treatment and after were shot together. And it's interesting talking about the wine sequence and the spaghetti, how that was done. I mean, Stanley introduced this character, this strong man, this Charles Atlas, Mr. Universe, because he said, you know, well, why don't you just get up and walk out of the house? Which was, in fact, a good point. And the wine sequence was determined by this strong man sitting on my left, who was liable to sort of just pick me up and tear me to shreds. So that's the kind of tension, the pulling tensions in the scene, just come really from that one idea.
Well, that worked very well. I was very pleased with it.
Yeah.
I think the whole film worked extremely well.